Hello and welcome to UAP Check News, your demonetized and ad-free source of information on identified anomalous phenomena. I'm here today with my co-host and translator extraordinaire, Guillaume. Welcome, Guillaume.
Hey everybody, it's a pleasure to be with you, and for this, I believe, a third interview in English on this channel. We're very proud. I think we need to applaud Baptiste for his efforts because he's French, and as you know, French people, are just notoriously bad in English, but Baptiste is one of the few exceptions. He does all right.
I will try to speak as slowly as I can. That's hard for me.
Yes. Very good.
So today we have the pleasure of welcoming Robert Powell. He has a BS degree in chemistry and is a former collegiate debater. He has 28 years experience in engineering management in the semiconductor industry, and he was a former director of research at MUFON from 2007 to 2017. He also created MUFON's Science Review Board in 2012, and he authored UFOs and Government, a historical inquiry, and is currently Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies Executive Board member. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Baptiste.
I hope I haven't misspoke in my introduction. That will be a shame for me. And it's a really great pleasure to have you on board. We've talked for years now, and I wanted to interview you so many times. And today we have a perfect opportunity with the release of a documentary about the Stephenville case, in which you were the main investigator. So I'm very glad to have that opportunity to speak with you.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here with you and with Guillaume.
Thank you.
So we both watched the documentary, but for the audience, can you explain what happened January 8, 2008 in Texas?
So on January 8th, there were probably well over 100 individuals who saw mostly unknown lights across an area of 2 counties in Texas. So that's an area roughly 20 miles by 40 miles distance. So in kilometers, that's, I don't know, maybe around 30 kilometers by 60 kilometers. And that began at around 6:30 p.m. in the evening and continued to 9 o'clock. So what was interesting about this case is that you had different witnesses seeing the object over 4 hours of time over various locations. So you don't just have a single instance where you could say that, okay, everyone, mistook what they actually saw.
In your experience as investigator, how often does such a case happen?
That type of case does not happen very often, maybe once every several years, 4, 5, 6 years. And a case similar to that would, of course, be the Nimitz case that happened in 2004, because that occurred over several hours over various physical locations. There have been several cases like that in history, but you don't get those too often.
Mm-hmm. What information was not covered in the documentary that you feel is important?
I think the documentary did a pretty good job of covering, the various issues. Perhaps the most critical issue is that I was able to align radar data with witness. So you have now basically two observation points, a radar and a witness. So I think that was probably the most important thing to stress that came out of the Stephenville incident.
Mhm. And how often did you manage to recover radar data in the investigation of your cases along your career?
Oh, how many times have I successfully gotten radar data?
Yes.
Oh, maybe 4 or 5 times. And today it's extremely difficult. I mean, I don't think I've gotten radar data in the last, 7 or 8 years.
Why is that?
I think, excuse me, let me turn
No
that
worries.
off. I think the reason for that seems to be that the FAA has become more sensitive to the subject, and they seem to have aligned more with the military organizations, right? Because there is within the United States a tight alignment between our civilian FAA organization and Homeland Security and our military organizations. Example of a case that I was unable to get data on was in February of 2021, so roughly 2 years ago. There was a case where an American airline jet was flying from Ohio, which is in the northeastern United States, down to New Mexico, which is in the southwestern United States. When it was over northeastern New Mexico, and it was at 37,000 feet, the pilot recorded or stated there was a cylindrical object that came within 500 feet or so of his aircraft. So that's considered too close when you're in an aircraft. So myself and several others requested radar data so that we could verify that, right? And the FAA denied the radar data because they said it was a criminal investigation, and so they never provided it. There's a couple of problems with their argument. One, the FAA is not a law enforcement organization, so they don't have the right to deny data for that reason. Second, at 37,000 feet, what civilian can fly a drone that would cause a criminal investigation, right? The only people who can fly a drone at 37,000 feet is our military. So if that was a drone, and maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, we'll never know because they will not provide the radar data.
Can you force them to do so? Can you sue them to obtain radar data?
The way it works is you can appeal, but the appeal goes to the FAA. So you appeal to the same organization that just denied you the data. If once you lose an appeal, you can go into the United States federal court system to try and sue. But the cost to do that runs into tens of thousands of dollars. So it's a very expensive process.
Do you think FOIA could be useful here?
In this particular case,
Yeah.
yes, that's what I sent actually was a FOIA, which they denied the FOIA.
Ah, okay.
Right. And so then I could appeal it, and which I did appeal it, and they have not ruled on the appeal, but I suspect they will finally deny it, which then the only option left is the federal court system.
That must be incredibly frustrating.
The first time it happened to me, yes, it was. And now I just kind of realize, we're not going to get radar data anymore, really.
And do you know what it happened at that point in time? But before you could have sometimes access to radar data, but then they denied any request?
The Stephenville case, actually, I think garnered a lot of attention in the media. And I think that's part of the reason that it became more and more difficult for me to obtain radar data.
They would be afraid that it gives a precedent that other investigations say, other investigators say, you give Robert the radar data, so for my case, give me the radar data. Do you think they fear that?
Possibly. When I got that radar data, that was in early 2008. I made a request for the same radar data in October of 2008, and I was denied it. So I sent a new FOIA requesting to know their conversation on why they denied it. And basically, it was a discussion between FAA administrators and their attorneys as to, what can they validly give for a reason as to why I should not be given radar data. And so the reason they came up with was, well, theoretically, with that data, I could track, for example, where Air Force One was in the United States, right? So I could track a critical aircraft, and then they said, and then they don't have time to redact all the radar data for that. So the easiest solution is to just not provide it. So that's where it's at today.
Mm-hmm. Talking about the FAA, how do you consider their strange way of talking about the subject? Because on one hand, they are very restrictive of information towards the public, but they say that they are very open to work with AERO and NASA.
Right. I saw that when the particular FAA administrator talked. And it was pretty clear to me that particular individual did not have a good understanding, really, of the way the FAA radar system operates or their track record in history related to radar data.
I had the same feeling, but I wanted to know if that was shared.
Yeah.
In your opinion, did the documentary remain faithful to the testimonies and your investigation?
It pretty much was fairly correct in everything that they stated. I mean, I think they exaggerated when they stated that the FAA will not give any radar data, because technically they still could. But all in all, I thought it was pretty good. Now, one part that was a little different, when I looked at the radar data, I never was able to verify that there were any jets chasing the UFOs. I was never able to verify that with the radar data. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't happen, just means I could not verify it. The only way it could have happened, right, would be one of two scenarios. Either number one, the jets were stealth, right? Or number two, the jets remained below altitude such so that radar could not have detected them while they were chasing the UFOs. And the F-16s I could track. Those are not stealth aircraft. But there is an F-22 base in New Mexico that's not far from this area. So if jets had come from there, I would not have been able to track those with FAA radar. So that's the only possibility I could come up with if you assume the witnesses are correct in saying that there was jets chasing the UFO.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very interesting. Now, did you have any? I won't say whistleblower. It's not the case, but any insider inside defense that could have tell you that it really happened. He knew these fighter pilots, and yes, there was a chase.
Well, one piece of evidence that I had was the manager of the local airport there, and this is a very small airport, right? These are small aircraft that only 2 to 4 people fit. So these are not jet, they're propellered aircraft. The manager of that airport said that on that night, he heard jets at very low altitude. And he said, you know, he's very familiar with jets at higher altitude and lower altitude. And by low altitude, he was talking about 1,000 feet or below, which is very low altitude for a military jet to fly in civilian airspace.
Right. Have you investigated other cases where a witness sees a UFO and then jet fighters go after them?
I mean, I guess you could say that in the case of the Nimitz incident, right?
Right.
Jet fighters engaged a UFO.
Right.
Not,
but
not
witnesses like on land. Witnesses on land seeing a UFO and then hearing like a jet coming after it.
I've had a few where a single individual, right, that I've interviewed in a particular case says he saw a UFO and a jet chasing it. But I always take that with a grain of salt, right? Because it's just one witness, one case. I kind of like to have multiple witnesses, kind of like in the Stephenville case, so that I know, it's more likely to have happened. So the Stephenville case and the Nimitz case are the only cases I'm aware of where you could make a pretty good argument that occurred.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And same thing. It's something I heard of, but I haven't had time to look into it. Did you investigate cases where a witness reported that planes weren't not pursuing it, but flying with it?
I've never had a good case about that. I mean, like I said, I've had single witnesses make that claim, but not, not with multiple witnesses where I could be confident.
So you offered the best book for me in English on UFOs. It's titled UFOs and Government. It's, I think, poorly known because each time I talk about it, it's new to people. And it's an absolute gold mine of my library by the sheer amount of information and reliability of information that is in it. So first thing first, congratulations for writing that book. And thank you so much for doing so, because I spent a whole year looking for reliable information on UFOs, and yours was the first book I could say, okay, that one is reliable. All the others were biased in untold ways. And for once, I had a clear picture with clear documentation about what historically happened on the subject. What gave you the idea of writing that book?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question, Baptiste. So it took us 5 years to write that book. And a lot of the accolades should go to Dr. Michael Swords, who was a key author in the book. And when the way it all came about, right, is when I was at MUFON, we thought, okay, we need a good history of the UFO subject. At that point in time, I had I was only 1 year into investigating the subject. So I was a novice at that point. And I met Michael Swords. And so myself and he and 4 to 5 other individuals, we actually got together in Dallas, Texas. So we came from different parts of the country, met there, and we started brainstorming on how we should write, what kind of book should we write, what should it be about, etc. And so I kind of facilitated the brainstorming. And that's how the book, UFOs and Government, first came about. And from there, it was 5 years before we finished the book. And much of that time was because of investigating copyright violations, right? There are a large number of photographs in that book. And we had to verify that they were all government photographs, or if they weren't, that we could get permission to use the photographs. That took a lot of time.
So, if I remember well, your book starts just after during the World War II. What gave you the idea of that frame for your historical book? Right now, we are talking a lot about 1930s cases in Europe. Why did you choose to take World War II?
So we talked about that, and because there's people who've claimed to have seen UFOs in the 1890s or the 1600s or whenever. But what we looked at was if you draw a graph, right, for the number of UFO sightings based on the year, when you get to the year 1942, you get an uptick, and that uptick never ends from then on. So we define that as being when the modern, what we call the modern UFO history, which began in 1942. And a lot of people think it began in 1947, right, in the United States because, of the event over Mount Hood in Washington State, the state of Washington. But actually, World War II is when the first large number of UFO reports began. Those were called Foo Fighters, but they actually weren't all just Foo Fighters. Some of those reports were of disc-like objects also.
What was the most challenging thing in writing that book? Because to be honest, if someone tasked me of writing that would be a nightmare for me. Because I would spend, as you said, years looking for information and putting it together. So beyond that historical work, what was the most challenging?
Well, for me, because I did much of the editing and the putting of the book together, and Mike Swords provided much of the knowledge base, but we also had 6 or 7 other editors. So it was a big challenge getting 6 or 7 different individuals to get their work done on time. And then we had to try to make the book flow without, having 7 different types of writing styles. So I kind of made the writing style the same across the book. So yes. that was the biggest challenge, probably.
Yeah, that's a great success because the book is absolutely seamless in its reading. You can absolutely dive deep into it, and you don't feel the various authors that are listed on the cover book. And it's really an impressive task. I've been recommended it for years now, and please write Tom 2 for the events that are unfolding today. But I think you have the team. I think you are the only ones who have the proper team to do that type of work due to the amount of information that is being spread right now.
There is a second book that is being worked on, and it's more about the phenomenology of the phenomenon. And the difference is, though, is I said after doing that first book, I would not be the editor. I would contribute a chapter, but I was not going to edit that again.
Yes.
So this book has been going on for, I don't know, probably 7 years now. Hopefully it will get published.
That would be
Dr. Eddie
very
Bullard
interesting.
has agreed to be the editor of this book. So I know he's working hard on that. I did want to say one thing on the first book, UFOs and Government. I was the author of the French chapter. And I will say I gained a lot of respect for the French program on OVNI or UFOs because to me, that was the first program that was civilian based, that was tied to the French space program. And also I thought in the two cases that occurred in Aix-de-Provence and Nantes, that both of those cases, the investigators were able to bring in French universities to do the analysis. And I thought they did excellent work there, not only in the analysis, but in the sampling. So I definitely admired the French work when I made that chapter.
Yes, that's something that is poorly known inside France. Everybody interested in the subject knows about the Japan, but few knows that the Japan is linked to the best laboratories in France and can request any experiment to be made to further study and investigate cases. That's why we have a very low budget but very extensive research in France regarding UFOs. When you write UFOs and Government, what was the part that most interested you in the research made by the other authors?
Well, I'll have to say the overall history of the United States, because when we first began writing that, I only had 1 year of experience in this subject. So it was like writing that book was because I was taking what Mike Swords had provided and massaging it and rewriting it. It was like having a history course in a learning course on the phenomenon. So that's what I learned the most, was actually putting that book together. Mm-hmm. And an interesting thing, Mike was a professor at Western Michigan University, and Mike does not like high tech. So when this book was done, he hand wrote all the chapters, and I converted every one of his handwritten chapters into text. And then I would, massage it a little bit, but it basically came from his handwritten notes, because at that point in time, he refused to own a computer.
Oh, that's an hard task.
Now today he does. He finally broke down about 7 or 8 years ago, but then he did not have a computer.
I think he pitied you in advance of the second book. He felt Robert isn't going to want to do that again. I have to get a computer. That's probably what happened.
Yeah, so he just got a computer now.
We will send him one to do an interview on American history on UFOs. You're also executive board member of a scientific coalition for UAP studies. Can you explain what is the SCU?
Okay, so the SCU's basic mission is the scientific study of UAPs. That's the basic mission. And some of our goals to achieve that mission is, of course, writing reports ourselves, but also trying to get academia involved in the subject. So we do anything we can to make the subject more approachable to academia. And today, SCU was founded in 2017. Today, we have almost 290 members. Almost 30% have PhDs. More than half have advanced degrees. And our members include, we have one member who's with the European Space Agency. We have several members who currently and previously worked at NASA. And lots of members out of the high-tech field, as well as the defense industry. So there is a lot of interest in this subject in the scientific field. And the stigma is still there, but it's not as bad as it used to be. So more and more scientists are becoming willing to have their name associated with a UAP organization.
You just mentioned, I'm sorry, Baptiste. Yeah, thank you. You just mentioned having a NASA person at SCU. Have you talked about that person, about what, the study NASA has been doing? What's his opinion on that? Does he think that, it's being done right? Have you had a conversation with him about that, or her?
Well, actually, and I can't really tell you who the person is, but I knew about the NASA study that was going to come into existence almost a year before it happened.
Wow.
And the reason was because that same person asked me, that NASA was interested in making a determination of whether or not any of their satellite systems could identify UAP. And so I went and looked at the various NASA satellite systems. And it was clear pretty early that their systems are not designed to identify a UAP. There were some systems that might have a chance, but not very likely.
Right.
The military systems are really the only ones that have the capability of identifying an object that's 50 feet in diameter or smaller from orbit.
Now, a lot of NASA astronauts have actually talked about seeing things sometimes and have advanced their opinions or testimonies regarding UAP, but of course none of that has been talked about by NASA in the one or two panels that they've had publicly. What's your opinion deep down? What do you think? NASA is being transparent, entirely transparent?
I think, as far as I know, NASA's being transparent on what astronauts have seen when they're in orbit. I think most of the time what they see is at far distance. So I'm not sure that anyone can really conclude for certain, what it is that they're witnessing. But if NASA is hiding anything, my gut feel would be because the military came to them with a specific question about an incident, and they wanted their NASA scientists, for example, to perhaps provide their observation and thoughts. So in that type of situation, NASA might not be able to say anything. But as far as I know, I've never seen, I've seen a lot of, what you see on the internet, that someone sees, takes a picture of something in orbit, but it's nothing that I could definitely say, hey, that's, an object that shouldn't be there.
Right.
And there was a similar, there were similar reports from cosmonauts in Russia, Soviet Russia, that declared observing structures in space, and thinking at the time that it was United States that were building stations already in space. And then afterwards, they discovered that they were the ones ahead in the space race. And the military intelligence service, the GRU, if I remember well, was very puzzled by that information. still something 70 years ago, almost, that is still puzzling for many, to have both reports from astronauts on one side and cosmonauts on the other, both describing objects in space at the very beginning of the space age. Did you notice a particular point in time when you had an influx of members into the SCU in the recent years?
Yes, when the SCU was founded in August of 2017. So once the New York Times article occurred in December of 2017, we had a small influx of new members probably in the early part of 2018. But I think where we had the biggest influx was when the military indicated that, yes, those videos were military videos and that they were officially releasing them. We had a pretty good influx there. So anytime there was a lot of media coverage, whether it was about a new congressional, piece of legislation, or Arrow giving their first report, or when the UAP task force gave their first report, we would get more members apply.
So it's a scientific coalition. So how do you do science on something you can't catch?
That is a very good question, Baptiste, because, and I have a view on that. Most scientists, right, want to be able to hold, like if you're observing a star, a planet, or doing an experiment in chemistry, you're able to repeat that experiment. You're able to bring multiple pieces of instrument to bear on it. But if you think about in science, that works well in the hard sciences, right? But as you take for instance, biology. If you ask me, okay, at a given temperature in a given food supply to some bacteria, how fast will they multiply? I can do that experiment and someone else can repeat it and it's fairly repeatable. Move that up to a pack of dogs. If I take a pack of dogs and I put, let's say, a particular source of food in front of them, how will they react? Well, that you can't duplicate that, right? It will vary from time to time. And as the intelligence of your subject matter goes up, right, you get to humans. Now sociology and psychology is very what they call a soft science, where it is difficult to duplicate that, right? So imagine something, even if you make the assumption that we're dealing with an intelligence, right? How can we expect that to be repeatable, right? That's where I think science has to realize we're not dealing with mixing two chemicals and verifying it and setting up an experiment in a laboratory. You're now dealing with an intelligence that's more intelligent than you. And as a matter of fact, you have to always wonder who's really in control of the experiment, right?
Right. So you're talking about intelligence. How would you convince someone that there is an intelligence behind the phenomenon?
So I think that's a very important question. And that's one that science to date, I don't think has answered properly, right? Because you heard NASA state, for example, we have not seen any evidence that indicates that UAP are extraterrestrial in origin, right? Well, in my opinion, NASA makes a mistake when they make that statement, right? Because if I'm going to say I don't have any evidence of extraterrestrial origin, before I can make that statement, I have to define what data do I need in order to define something as extraterrestrial, right? Because if I haven't laid that out, I can't make a determination, yes or no, as to is this extraterrestrial.
Fine.
And I think what happens is there's all this public media pressure on NASA, right? because that's what everyone wants to know. Do you have evidence of ET? So the reaction from NASA is, no, we don't have any evidence. But they fail to stop and think, wait, what's the criteria? Because that criteria has to be determined. My own personal criteria for that is if you can establish that an object is capable of moving in a straight line with acceleration of 10 Gs or higher, right, and then capable of stopping, that you are looking at something that we are incapable of doing. So by definition, if we can't create it, it's not human made. Now, it may not truly be extraterrestrial because you have to take into account the possibility that it perhaps still comes from Earth, right? But it's definitely not of human origin. And by definition, it's intelligently controlled because objects don't accelerate to 10 Gs just on their own. It takes intelligence to do that. So that's, and just real quick, for some of your audience may think, well, there are aircraft that can move at 6, 8, 9 Gs, right? But that's not linear acceleration. That's curvature, and that's when you get the G forces on an aircraft. If they're going in a straight line, none of our aircraft can go beyond maybe 2 G forces of acceleration.
So our audience is really data-driven and really towards art sciences. Can you explain to them what are the different avenues of research currently being pursued by the SCU, and how can they reach out to you if they want to contribute?
So yeah, SCU has multiple projects ongoing right now. One, for example, that we're working on is how can we improve and develop the relationship between universities in the study of UAP, right? So in other words, can we somehow provide grants to universities for their students to work on a subject related to UAP, right? It doesn't have to be exactly UAP, but a subject that ties into the UAP phenomenon. Another project we have looks at propulsion mechanisms, where what they try to do is model using fluid dynamics as to how an object could move in the same manner as UAP supposedly move. We have a third team that's characterizing drones, right? What are all of the capabilities that we can determine that man-made drones currently have? Because once we know that, then we can say, okay, if this object did the following, can that be explained by a man-made drone or not? We have another project, which we should have a paper out on shortly, where we look at the characteristics of UAP. So what we did is we took approximately 300 cases where the object was very close to the observer. You had multiple observers or a highly qualified observer, and you had a report that was done, someone investigated it, and it was occurred in the daytime, or if it was at night, there was illumination that was available so that you could see the characteristics of the object. And so from that, we took those 300 cases, we said, where's the commonalities? Is there a particular shape that stands out? And so that's another one of our project teams, and we'll have the paper out on that soon. But basically, there are 3 disc type shapes that stood out, and then 2 triangular shapes that stood out. And you could see this happen in multiple reports. And it was the very similar reported object in terms of like the ratio of the length, for example, of a disc to the thickness of the disc. So we could detect some common ratios there. So those are some of the projects that we have ongoing in SCU, and also any member within SCU is free to initiate their own project if they can get enough team members.
And how can new members make them known?
I'm sorry, Baptiste.
How come new members join you?
Okay, if a new member, if someone's interested in joining SCU, if they go to our website, which is explorescu.org, and at that website they will see under the category More, they can scroll down and they will see how they can join the organization. So that if you go to the far right under More, and right where it says Memberships and Partners, and that's where they can click on that and find out how to join the organization. And we also have a number of partners, such as Sigma 23AF, which is a French organization. And by the way, I didn't mention it, but there's a project that we're doing with that group on related to radar. So it's the use of radar for detection of UAP is what the project is.
Perfect. Did you have a chance to read the latest version of the defense funding bill?
Yes, I've read the latest version. It's pretty extensive.
Yes, absolutely. I have to admit that we have lengthy laws in France, but that's nothing compared to the NDAA. That's amazing and you write one each year. That's amazing. What do you think of the latest changes to the law?
So to give your audience a summary of what every year the United States has their defense bill, where this is how the Air Force and the Navy get all their money to develop their weaponry and support, So this year there was an amendment to it related to UAP. And this amendment, I don't remember how many pages. It's somewhere around 40 or more pages. But it actually talks about making sure the government is open to the public. And if there's any information about non-human intelligence, that it's provided to the public. And it goes into such detail, right? That if you had done this 7 or 8 years ago, a politician, that would cost them their career because there was so much stigma on UAP. Well, this amendment was made by the head of the United States Senate, and he's the majority whip leader of the U.S. Senate. His name is, now all of a sudden I forget it, Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer. Okay. A politician, and I'm sure it's the same in France, they don't stick their neck out to risk their career unless they're pretty positive about something, right? That's just the nature of a politician. Same in the United States. Well, for Chuck Schumer to have put his name on this amendment, and not just his name on it, he is the sponsor of the amendment. He had to know something that convinced him that he was safe in doing that. And that, to me, tells me more than almost anything, right, is that a important U.S. politician was willing to put his name on a document. So he must know something to feel confident that he's safe in doing that.
Yeah, speaking of one particular element, the crash retrieval and back engineering, alleged back engineering of UFOs. I heard you say on another podcast that at the beginning of 2023, you were at 1% in terms of being convinced that it actually happened. And then when David Grush came out, it went up to 50%. And now that Chuck Schumer's name is or was on an amendment that offered a panel of members eminent domain power to get hold of possible materials. I wonder, where are you now? 55%?
Well, actually, Guillaume,
56%?
that's a good question. But when David Grush came out, it wasn't he that drove me to 50%, right? That definitely was interesting, right? But I still don't know for certain. It was actually Chuck Schumer's amendment that drove me to 50%.
All right. Okay, thank you, Robert. So I can't push you up a little bit. Give me 1 more percent. Come on.
Well, I'll
percent?
give you another percent, Guillaume, just because you and Baptiste are good guys. 2%. You're at
wow.
52 now.
All right. That's a good idea for us to invite you.
So at the moment we are recording that interview, we just had the latest version of the NDAA, and in it sadly there are some parts that are missing from the Schumer amendment due to the opposition of some figures inside the House of Representatives. In your experience dealing with US politicians, how do you explain that there is such an opposition to releasing information to the public that is governmental information?
Yeah, my view on that is that, okay, now, so let's back up a little bit. This NDAA, right? The most important part of that is not actually the UAP amendment. The most important part is all the money that goes to the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, and the Army, right? And that's what Congress battles on. That's the big decision. The UAP is actually this small part that got added on. And most of your congressmen, whether in the Senate or the House, they're more concerned about how much money do we give to the various military groups than they are about this UAP issue, right? But what is interesting to me is that this committee decided that they need to address the UAP portion, right? That committee's main job was, where's all this money going for the Air Force and the Navy? But some of them decided, let's go cut some things out of this UAP amendment. So there's no way to know for certain, but I suspect that they were influenced to do that, right? Because I don't think that on their own they would have spent the time to do it. And all of this kind of adds to this 50% level I'm at, that indicates that there are people within the military who are wanting to keep something secret.
One could imagine that the main reason for secrecy is defense. If it involves national security, you have all the reasons you need to keep the silence on it. I find it very interesting that that explanation is rarely used as argumentation. If the military keep the silence because it involves national security, it seems really weird that strange weather phenomena involves national security.
Yeah, and this is really why I think Congress needs to provide money to academia and the scientific community to investigate this, because as long as it's the military, the national security aspect will always take precedent over anything else. And so I don't see us, the military has had 75 to 80 years and they've been unsuccessful. There's no reason to think they'll be successful tomorrow. So I think it's time to put this in the hands of the scientific community rather than the military government. And also, my view is two things. One, I don't believe that they can reverse engineer if you make this assumption that they have a craft, let's say, that's hundreds of years more advanced than us. I do not believe that they could reverse engineer it. And that's based on my experience with reverse engineering in the semiconductor industry. I know what's involved. We could discuss it, but it is very difficult to reverse engineer a technology that exists today, let alone reverse engineer something that's hundreds of years in advance. And then the second reason I think the military should not be involved is if you make the assumption this is a intelligence that's well beyond us, then the question is, do we want first contact to be with a military organization? I don't see that as having a good outcome. I think it's much better if you have first contact that it's done through civilian groups and it's done carefully and thoughtfully.
Absolutely. Now, I'm interested in the fact that you mentioned that, you had your career in the semiconductor industry. There's a rumor floating around that microchips were derived from materials that was, recovered, on UFOs. What do you think of that concept? Do you find that ridiculous? Do you find it possible? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I find that possibility just about at zero.
Okay.
Because when I started on semiconductors, we were making transistors that were 7 to 9 microns in size, which is very large. Today, we're submicrons, so an order of magnitude smaller. And every year, we just slowly improved to get smaller and smaller and smaller. There was no magical, okay, here's how you can go make a semiconductor. We slowly developed that over time, and it took the work of thousands of individuals across multiple corporations to do that.
Right. Thank you. It's an important piece of knowledge there.
Yeah.
So to close the interview, the SCU conference is the annual meeting point for the subject. Have you decided when the 2024 conference will take place?
Good question, Baptiste. We're pretty sure the 2024 conference will occur in June. And the location, we're trying to decide right now between Huntsville, Alabama, which is where we've done it before, and Toronto, Canada. So we may have it in Toronto, and we should know the answer to this within a week.
Oh, great. Let me know so I can add it to the interview if you have the information in the meantime.
Okay, I will.
So, Robert, thank you so much. You are very precious to me, I have to say, because you were the serious duo to the subject that I was looking for 12 months in a painful research. And I can't recommend your book enough, UFOs and Government, a historical inquiry. Please, everybody that is interested in that topic, sadly it isn't translated in French, but everybody that is interested in that topic must read that book. If you have one book to read on the subject, please read that one. I can't emphasize that enough.
I think Baptiste wants royalties or something.
But I will, and it's a great reference book too, not only to read, but you can refer to it. There are over 1,000 sources that we have in the book, in the index, and we have multiple cross indexes. So it's a good reference book also.
What I would like is a French translation for my audience. The message is sent. Robert, thank you again. It has been a real pleasure to have you on board today. Goodbye.
Thank you, Baptiste. Thank you, Guillaume.
Thank you, Robert.
Aujourd'hui.